Sometimes life comes at you fast. One moment everything feels stable, manageable even, and the next you're lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering how it all went so wrong. Tonight, while you're watching those blocky trees sway in the Minecraft wind, while you're listening to the gentle sound of pickaxes against stone, I want to share some stories with you. Stories about people whose lives fell completely apart. Stories about secrets that couldn't stay buried. Stories about confessions that changed everything. These aren't just stories. They're windows into moments when the careful constructions we build around our lives suddenly crumble. And maybe, just maybe, hearing about other people navigating their darkest hours will make your own struggles feel a little less lonely. So settle in, get comfortable, let the gentle rhythm of the Minecraft gameplay wash over you while we dive into some of the most haunting confessions Reddit has ever seen. Our first story starts on an ordinary Saturday night, the kind of night where most people are scrolling through their phones, looking for distraction, maybe sharing a meme or two with friends. But for one Reddit user, this particular Saturday night became the moment everything changed, the moment a secret too heavy to carry alone finally spilled out into the digital void. The post appeared on a popular subreddit, accompanied by a photo of a sad-looking bear. It was a confession bear meme, one of those internet traditions where people admit to minor transgressions like eating their roommate's leftovers or lying about reading terms and conditions. Most of these confessions are harmless. Funny, even. But this one was different. The text on the image read simply, "My sister had an abusive meth addict boyfriend. I killed him with his own drugs while he was unconscious, and they ruled it as an overdose." For a moment, the internet seemed to freeze. This wasn't someone admitting they hated their co-worker or that they'd cheated on a diet. This was someone confessing to murder, and they'd done it using a meme. The user's name was Naruto. Within minutes of posting, the thread exploded. Thousands of comments poured in. Some people were skeptical, convinced this had to be a joke. Someone seeking attention or trying to score meaningless internet points. Others weren't so sure, because Naruto had made a critical mistake that no one planning a fake confession would make. He'd posted it from his regular account, not a throwaway, not some anonymous profile created 5 minutes earlier. His actual Reddit account, the one he'd been using for months, the one connected to other posts that revealed details about his life. And Reddit users are nothing if not thorough. Within an hour, amateur internet detectives had pieced together an alarming amount of information. They found his middle name from an old post, his birthday, his job history, his military rank. They discovered where he lived. One user found his Steam profile by searching his username. Another tracked down his Facebook page, his Twitter, even his old MySpace account from years ago. Everything matched up. This wasn't some random troll using a fake persona. This was a real person who'd apparently just confessed to a real crime. The reality of what was happening seemed to hit Naruto all at once. He started posting defensive comments. First, he claimed there was some truth to the confession but refused to say what parts were real and what weren't. He tried to laugh it off, posting another meme that read, "If you joke about murder on Reddit without a throwaway account, you're going to have a bad time." But the damage was done. Screenshots were everywhere. People had already saved copies of everything he'd written. Deleting his posts wouldn't make them disappear. Some users were surprisingly sympathetic. They argued that killing an abusive meth addict to protect a family member wasn't the same as cold-blooded murder, that maybe Naruto had done something wrong for the right reasons. One person wrote, "He killed a person who was abusing his sister. Sure, murder is wrong, and there may have been a better solution, but there also may not have been." Others were horrified by this moral relativism. So if it's okay to murder someone for abusing your sister, it then must absolutely be okay for the meth addict's family to then murder Naruto for killing their son. And then everyone can just keep murdering whoever they want, one user shot back. But the debate about ethics was quickly overshadowed by a more practical concern. Multiple users reported the post to the FBI's TIPS website. They sent screenshots, Naruto's real name, every piece of identifying information they'd found. The San Diego Police Department confirmed they were investigating. They told reporters this might be a hoax, but they couldn't afford to ignore it. Sometimes one anonymous tip is what breaks a cold case wide open. Narato's final posts were desperate attempts at damage control. "If I had $1 for every time someone took me seriously on the internet, I would be able to retire from today alone," he wrote. "If you want to catch a murderer, get out of your house, put on some tights, and go fight crime." But it was too late for jokes. The confession was out there, the police were involved, and whether the story was true or not, Narato had learned a painful lesson about the permanence of the internet, about how quickly a moment of impulse can spiral into something you can never take back. What's particularly chilling about this story isn't just the confession itself, it's the casualness of it. The way someone thought they could share the darkest secret of their life, wrapped in the soft packaging of an internet meme, as if making it funny somehow made it less real, as if the medium of delivery could soften the impact of the message. Years later, we still don't know the full truth. Did Narato really kill his sister's boyfriend? Was it self-defense, protection of family? Or was the whole thing an elaborate fiction designed to see how the internet would react? The police investigation remained inconclusive. No charges were ever publicly filed. The story faded from headlines, joining the long list of internet mysteries that never quite get resolved. But the incident sparked a larger conversation about confession in the digital age, about how the anonymity of the internet makes people feel safe saying things they'd never admit in person, about how the distance of a screen can make the weight of our actions feel lighter than they really are. Sometimes confessions don't come wrapped in memes. Sometimes they emerge slowly, over years, through changed behavior and distancing and the gradual unraveling of relationships. Sometimes a confession isn't words at all. It's what happens when someone you love becomes a stranger. This next story comes from someone whose world shattered not because of what was said, but because of what remained unspoken. It's about a marriage that ended not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet, devastating realization. The poster, we'll call her Maya, had been with her husband for 7 years. They'd met in college, fallen in love with the easy comfort of young people who think they have forever figured out. They got married in a small ceremony with close friends. No grand celebration, just 2 people promising to navigate life together. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. On the surface, everything looked stable, normal, the kind of life people dream about when they're planning their futures. But underneath, something was wrong. Maya couldn't quite name it at first. It wasn't that her husband was obviously cruel or neglectful. He went to work. He came home. He helped with the kids when asked. But there was an emptiness to his presence, a hollowness in the way he moved through their shared life, like he was performing the role of husband and father rather than actually being those things. The intimacy that had once come naturally between them had evaporated, not just physical intimacy, though that too had faded to nothing, but the small moments of connection, the inside jokes, the comfortable silences, the way partners know each other's thoughts before they're spoken, all of it gone, replaced by polite distance and carefully neutral conversations about schedules and grocery lists. Maya tried to address it. She asked what was wrong. She suggested date nights, couples therapy, anything to bridge the growing chasm between them. Her husband would nod, agree that they should work on things, and then nothing would change. It was like talking to someone who'd already left, but whose body hadn't gotten the message yet. The real confession came not from her husband, but from someone else. Maya ran into an old college friend of theirs at a coffee shop. They caught up, traded stories about their kids, laughed about shared memories. And then, almost as an afterthought, the friend mentioned something that stopped Maya cold. "How's your husband doing with everything? I mean, with the transition and all?" Maya stared, not understanding. What transition? The friend's face changed, realizing she'd revealed something she wasn't supposed to know. She tried to backtrack, but Maya wouldn't let it go. Slowly, reluctantly, the friend explained. Maya's husband had confided in her months ago. He was transgender. He'd known for years, long before the marriage. But he'd thought he could suppress it, could live as the person everyone expected him to be. He'd gotten married thinking that commitment to family and normalcy would make the feeling go away. It hadn't worked. The dysphoria had only grown worse. He'd started hormone therapy in secret. He was planning to transition fully, to live as his authentic self. But he hadn't figured out how to tell his wife. hadn't figured out how to explain that the person she'd married was never really who he was. Maya sat in that coffee shop, processing information that rewrote her entire marriage. All those years of emotional distance suddenly made terrible sense. Her husband hadn't been pulling away from her specifically. He'd been drowning in his own identity crisis, unable to be present in their relationship because he couldn't be present in his own life. She went home that night and confronted him, not with anger, but with the exhausted sadness of someone who's just realized they've been living a lie. He broke down, admitted everything, the years of hiding, the therapy sessions he'd attended alone, the clothing he'd bought and hidden away, the name he'd chosen for himself, the life she'd been waiting to start until he could figure out how to have the conversation that would end their marriage as they knew it. Maya wasn't angry about the transgender identity itself. She understood, in an abstract way, that her husband was struggling with something fundamental about himself. What hurt was the deception. The years of distance that now had an explanation, but still felt like abandonment. The fact that he'd chosen to share this with friends before telling his own wife. That he'd let her spend years wondering what she'd done wrong, thinking she was failing as a partner, when the truth was he'd checked out of their marriage long ago. They divorced quietly. Her husband transitioned, started living openly as a woman, remarried eventually, to someone who'd known her authentic self from the beginning. By all accounts, she's happy now, living the life she always should have lived. But Maya was left picking up pieces of a life that had disintegrated without warning. The man she'd married effectively didn't exist, hadn't existed for a long time. Their wedding photos showed a person who'd been performing a role, going through motions, fundamentally disconnected from the moment. How do you grieve someone who's still alive? How do you process the end of a marriage when there was no betrayal, no villain, just two people whose paths had diverged in a way neither of them could have predicted? In her Reddit post, Maya wrote about the loneliness of her experience. How people told her she should be supportive, should celebrate her ex-husband's journey to authenticity. And she was, in theory. She wanted him to be happy, but she also needed permission to grieve, to be angry at the years of silence, to mourn the future they'd planned that would never happen. Everyone tells me I should just be glad he's living his truth now, she wrote. But what about my truth? What about the fact that I built my entire adult life around someone who knew the whole time that they couldn't be the person I needed? That feels like a confession that came way too late. The responses to her post were mixed. Some people accused her of being transphobic, of centering her own hurt over her ex-husband's struggle. Others understood the complicated grief of loving someone who'd been unable to love you back because they were trapped in a prison of their own identity. A few people shared similar stories. Marriages that had ended not because of infidelity or abuse, but because one person had been living a lie so fundamental that no amount of love could bridge the gap. What struck me most about Maya's story was the question it raised about truth and timing. If her husband had come out before they got married, she could have made an informed choice. She could have chosen to support him as a friend while finding a romantic partner who was emotionally available in the ways she needed. But he'd kept it secret, hoping it would go away, and in doing so had stolen years of her life. Is that confession, or is it the opposite? A truth held so close that it becomes a kind of lie. Not all confessions are about identity or murder. Sometimes they're about the small, corrosive deceptions that eat away at relationships from the inside. Sometimes they're about discovering that the person you trusted most has been living a double life right in front of you. This next story comes from someone who found their partner's secret in the most modern way possible, through a Ring camera, through technology that was supposed to make them feel safer but instead revealed the one thing they never wanted to see. The poster, who we'll call James, had been dating his girlfriend for 6 years. They'd met in their early 20s, navigated the chaos of figuring out adult life together. They'd moved in together 3 years ago, splitting rent on a modest apartment. They talked about marriage casually, the way couples do when they're not quite ready but know that's where things are heading eventually. James worked from home most days as a software developer. His girlfriend, Sarah, worked in marketing at a downtown firm. Their schedules were different but complementary. She left early, came home late. He was at his computer most of the day, taking breaks to run errands or walk their dog. It was a comfortable routine. The kind of life that feels stable, even if it's not particularly exciting. They'd installed a Ring doorbell 6 months earlier after a string of package thefts in their building. Nothing major, just a security precaution. James rarely checked the footage. There was no reason to. Their lives were quiet, predictable. Nothing interesting ever happened at their doorstep. Until one Wednesday afternoon, when James was reviewing notifications, trying to figure out what time the mail had arrived, he scrolled back through the day's footage and saw something that made his heart stop. The timestamp read 2:15 in the afternoon. James had been at his desk, in the apartment, working on debugging some code. Sarah should have been at work. But there she was on the grainy footage, standing at their front door, with someone, a man James didn't recognize. The video showed Sarah laughing, leaning into this stranger in a way that was unmistakably intimate. His hand rested on her lower back. She turned her face up toward his. They kissed, not a brief peck. A real kiss. The kiss of two people who'd done this before, who were comfortable with each other's bodies. Sarah fumbled with her keys. They stumbled through the door, wrapped around each other, completely unaware that every moment was being recorded. The video ended as the door closed behind them. James sat staring at his computer screen, trying to process what he'd just seen. His girlfriend, in their apartment, in the middle of a workday, with another man, while James himself was in the next room with his headphones on, oblivious. He scrolled back through previous days of footage. Monday, there she was again with the same man. 2 o'clock that time. The previous Friday. 3 times in 1 week. How long had this been going on? And how had James been so completely unaware? He checked her location history on their shared app. She'd told him she was working from a coffee shop those days. Needed a change of scenery to focus on a big project. He'd thought nothing of it. Never questioned. Why would he? They trusted each other. Or so he'd thought. The confrontation that evening was ugly. Sarah tried to deny it at first, then crumbled when James showed her the videos. She cried, apologized, said it didn't mean anything. It was just stress relief. The other guy didn't matter. It was just physical. James asked the question that haunts anyone who's been betrayed. How long? Sarah hesitated. Then, about 18 months? 18 months. A year and a half. While James had been planning their future, looking at engagement rings, Sarah had been maintaining an entire secret relationship. The man was a co-worker. They'd started as friends, then it became more. She'd meant to end it so many times. But she couldn't. The excitement was addictive. The risk. The feeling of being desired in a way that felt different from the comfortable domesticity she shared with James. What made it worse was realizing how calculated it had been. She'd deliberately picked times when James would be home, when she knew he'd be focused on work with noise-cancelling headphones on. She'd used their shared apartment, their shared bed, for her affair. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was systematic deception spanning months. James moved out that week, ended the relationship, blocked her number, told their mutual friends simply that things hadn't worked out. Some people pressed for details, but he kept them to himself. There was no satisfaction in exposing her, no winner in making the betrayal public. There was just the quiet devastation of realizing that someone you trusted completely had been lying to you nearly every day for 18 months. In his Reddit post, James wrote about the strange, specific betrayal of being cheated on in your own home, in the space you were supposed to feel safest. I keep thinking about all those afternoons, he wrote. I was sitting 10 feet away, working, thinking she was downtown at her office, and she was in our bedroom with someone else. How do you trust anyone after that? How do you ever feel secure again? The responses were sympathetic, but also pragmatic. People shared their own stories of discovered infidelity. The common thread was the same. It's not the act of cheating that destroys you. It's the realization that your entire reality was a carefully maintained illusion. That while you were living one story, your partner was living a completely different one. That everything you thought you knew was wrong. One commenter wrote something that stuck with me. Betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your ability to trust your own perception of reality. Because if you couldn't see something that big happening right in front of you, what else are you missing? What else is everyone hiding? James eventually got therapy to work through the aftermath, not because he was struggling to move on from Sarah specifically, but because the betrayal had shaken something fundamental in his worldview. He found himself questioning everything, reading into innocent comments, looking for deception where there was none. The therapist called it hypervigilance, a trauma response, his brain's way of trying to protect him from being blindsided again. 2 years later, according to his update posts, James is doing better. He's dating someone new. They're taking it slow. He's learned to trust again, though it doesn't come as easily as it used to. He still has moments where his mind goes to dark places, wondering what he's not seeing, what secrets are being kept. But he's learned to recognize those thoughts for what they are, echoes of old pain, not reflections of current reality. The Ring camera is gone. He doesn't need that kind of security system anymore. Doesn't want the temptation to check footage, to look for threats that probably aren't there. Sometimes, he's learned, you have to choose to trust, even when you know how badly that trust can be broken. The alternative is living in a prison of suspicion, and that's no way to live at all. Let's shift gears, because not every confession is about harm someone has done to another person. Sometimes the most powerful confessions are about harm we've done to ourselves, about the lies we tell, not to protect our secrets from others, but to protect ourselves from truths we're not ready to face. This story comes from a woman I'll call Rachel. She posted in a recovery subreddit, in one of those late-night moments when the weight of your own life becomes too heavy to carry alone. When the only option is to type it all out, send it into the void, and hope someone out there understands. Rachel's confession started simple. I've been lying to everyone for 3 years, including myself. She described a life that looked, from the outside, completely normal. She had a good job as an accountant at a mid-sized firm, a nice apartment in a decent neighbourhood, friends she saw regularly for brunch and happy hours, a family who called every Sunday to check in. She was 32 years old and had, by most measures, successfully launched into adulthood. But underneath the veneer of normalcy, Rachel was drowning. She'd developed a drinking problem in her mid-20s, starting the way so many people do. A glass of wine after work to unwind. 2 glasses, then a bottle, then 2 bottles. She told herself it was fine. Everyone drinks. It's how adults cope with stress. It's social. It's normal. Except it stopped being social. She started drinking alone. Started looking forward to going home. Not to relax, but to drink without judgment. Started planning her evenings around how many bottles she could get through before bed. Her mornings became exercises in damage control, chugging water, taking ibuprofen, showing up to work with sunglasses to hide bloodshot eyes, telling co-workers she had insomnia, migraines, allergies, anything but the truth. The lies multiplied. When friends wanted to meet for dinner, she'd suggest bars. When they wanted to do active things, hiking or running, she'd make excuses. She couldn't admit that she was too hungover, too shaky, too dependent on the next drink to function in situations where alcohol wasn't readily available. Her family thought she was thriving. She video called them from angles that hid the bottles stacked in her recycling bin. She kept her place just clean enough that no one would suspect. She perfected the art of seeming put together while falling apart. And because she was functional drunk, she held on to her job, paid her bills on time, maintained enough of a social life that no one looked too closely. The confession came after a particular rock-bottom moment. Rachel had driven drunk. She'd done it before, convinced herself it was fine because she was a good drunk driver, because she'd never been caught, because she wasn't that impaired. But this time she'd woken up with no memory of getting home. Her car was in her parking spot, scratched on one side. She had no idea how that happened. No memory of the drive. Nothing. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She could have killed someone, could have destroyed a family, could have ended a life because she couldn't get through one evening without poisoning herself into oblivion. And she wouldn't even remember doing it. That's when she wrote the post. I need to say this somewhere. I'm an alcoholic. I've been one for years. Everyone in my life thinks I'm fine, that I have my shit together. I've worked so hard to maintain that illusion. But I'm not fine. I'm so far from fine, I can't even see fine from here. She described the exhaustion of maintaining the lie, the way she'd planned her entire life around access to alcohol. Turned down job opportunities that would have required travel because she couldn't risk being somewhere without her usual supply. Avoided romantic relationships because intimacy meant someone might notice, might see past the carefully constructed facade. The worst part, she wrote, is that I'm good at it. I'm really, really good at pretending, and that's made it so easy to keep going. If I was a messy drunk, if I lost my job or alienated my friends, maybe I would have gotten help sooner. But I've been functional enough that I could tell myself I don't have a problem. That I'm not like those alcoholics. I can hold it together. I just happen to drink every day. That's fine, right? That's normal. The responses to her post were overwhelming. Hundreds of people sharing their own stories. Some in recovery, some still struggling, some who'd lost loved ones to addiction. All of them recognizing the particular hell of functional addiction, the way society makes it so easy to hide behind normalcy, to dismiss concerns with, "but I'm successful," or "I'm not hurting anyone." One commenter wrote something that stuck with me. Functional addiction is just slow-motion suicide with good lighting and a decent camera angle. You're dying, you're just making sure the photos look good. Rachel's post was the beginning of her recovery journey, not the end. She checked herself into outpatient treatment the next week, started attending meetings, got a sponsor, told her family and close friends the truth. Some were shocked. Others admitted they'd suspected but didn't know how to bring it up, didn't want to be intrusive, didn't want to make her uncomfortable. The first year sober was brutal. Rachel described it in follow-up posts. The physical withdrawal, the emotional rawness of dealing with life without the buffer of alcohol, the realization of how much time she'd lost, the relationships she'd sabotaged without even realizing it, the version of herself she'd buried under years of drinking. But she also described moments of clarity, waking up without a hangover, actually remembering conversations, being present for friends and family in ways she hadn't been able to before, building a life that didn't revolve around the next drink. 3 years into recovery, Rachel posted an update. She'd changed jobs, moved to a new city for a fresh start. She was in a relationship with someone who'd known her in recovery from the beginning. No secrets, no hiding. She still went to meetings, still worked with her sponsor. The urge to drink hadn't magically disappeared. It probably never would. But she'd learned to sit with discomfort instead of drowning it. "I think about that night I drove drunk and can't remember it," she wrote. "How close I came to destroying not just my life but someone else's. How many times I'd done it before and gotten lucky. That could have been my legacy. That could have been the thing I confessed to from a jail cell instead of a Reddit thread. I got lucky. But I'm not relying on luck anymore." Rachel's story resonates because it's not dramatic in the way we expect addiction stories to be. There was no hitting bottom in a public way, no intervention or dramatic confrontation, just the quiet accumulation of lies and near misses until one day the weight became too much. Her confession wasn't an admission of a single act, it was an acknowledgement of years of deception, of lying to herself more than anyone else. And maybe that's the most important kind of confession. Not the shocking revelation that makes headlines, but the quiet admission that you're not okay, that you need help, that the story you've been telling everyone, including yourself, isn't true. Sometimes life falls apart not because of what we do, but because of what's done to us, because someone we trust takes something precious and destroys it. And the confession isn't from the person who caused the harm, it's from the person trying to rebuild in the aftermath. This next story is hard. It's about a woman named Jennifer who discovered her partner's secret in the worst possible way, and it's about the long, painful process of trying to reclaim yourself after someone violates you in ways that leave no visible scars. Jennifer had been with her boyfriend for 6 years. They'd met in their late 20s, quickly fallen into an easy rhythm. He was charming, attentive, made her laugh. They moved in together after a year, talked about marriage, about kids eventually, about building a life together that would last. Jennifer worked in healthcare. Long shifts that left her exhausted. She'd come home, crash on the couch, barely able to stay awake through dinner. Her boyfriend would encourage her to go to bed early, get proper sleep. He'd clean up, take care of things around the apartment, let her rest, It seemed sweet, considerate. What Jennifer didn't know was that her boyfriend had installed hidden cameras throughout their apartment, in the bedroom, in the bathroom. He'd been recording her for years. Not just casual moments, but intimate ones. Times when she thought she was completely alone and safe. She discovered it by accident. She'd borrowed his laptop when hers died, needed to access her email for a work emergency. While searching for the browser, she'd stumbled across a folder, hundreds of video files, thousands of images, all of her. The violation was comprehensive and calculated. He'd been careful about angles, about when he recorded. He'd watched her through these cameras while pretending to be present in the moment. While they'd been having normal conversations, sharing meals, being intimate, he'd been playing back footage of her, studying her, consuming her without consent. The worst part, Jennifer wrote, wasn't just the recording itself. It was realizing how much of their relationship had been built on this secret. How many times he'd encouraged her to shower, to change, to relax, knowing he'd be watching on his hidden devices. How he'd performed intimacy while fundamentally betraying it in the most invasive way possible. When Jennifer confronted him, he minimized. Said he was sorry, but it wasn't that big a deal. Everyone does this kind of thing. He just wanted to see her when she wasn't performing for him, when she was natural. He'd never shared the footage, never planned to. It was just for him. But that didn't make it better. If anything, his justifications made it worse, because he genuinely didn't seem to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. He'd turned their home into a surveillance state, had stolen her privacy completely, and he thought that was normal. That his desire to watch her without consent was more important than her fundamental right to privacy in her own space. Jennifer moved out immediately. Consulted a lawyer about pressing charges, but found the laws murky. Recording someone without consent in private spaces is illegal in some jurisdictions, but the penalties vary. The emotional trauma is massive but hard to quantify in legal terms. The lawyer told her it would be difficult to prosecute, time-consuming, potentially re-traumatizing, as she'd have to prove the extent of the violation. She decided against it. Not because what he did wasn't wrong, but because she didn't have the energy to fight that battle. She was already fighting just to feel safe in her own body again. In her Reddit post, Jennifer described the aftermath. The paranoia of wondering if there were cameras anywhere she went. The difficulty of being intimate with anyone new. The way she'd catch herself covering up in her own apartment, even though she checked thoroughly and knew there were no hidden devices. The trauma had rewired her sense of safety. People keep telling me I should just move on, she wrote. But how do you move on when someone spent 6 years systematically violating you? When every shower, every private moment, every vulnerable second was being watched and recorded by someone you trusted. How do you come back from that? The responses were heartbreaking. So many people, mostly women, sharing similar experiences, partners who'd recorded them without consent, who'd shared intimate photos without permission, who'd treated their privacy as something to be taken rather than respected. The common thread was the same. The violation wasn't just about the recording, it was about the fundamental betrayal of trust. The realization that someone you loved saw you as an object to consume rather than a person deserving of dignity. Jennifer went to therapy, specifically trauma-focused therapy with someone experienced in intimate partner violence, because that's what it was, even if it didn't involve physical harm. It was abuse, systematic, calculated, cruel. In her follow-up posts over the next year, Jennifer described the slow process of healing, learning to feel safe again, to trust again, to exist in private spaces without hypervigilance. She moved to a new city, started over in ways that felt both liberating and terrifying, cut ties with mutual friends who didn't understand why she was making such a big deal about something that didn't physically hurt her. Trauma doesn't need bruises to be real, she wrote in one update. Sometimes the worst harm is invisible. Sometimes it's someone taking your sense of safety and crushing it completely. And sometimes the confession you need isn't from the person who hurt you. It's your own admission that you're not okay, that you need help, that what happened wasn't your fault, and you deserve better. 3 years later, Jennifer posted a final update. She was doing better, in a new relationship with someone patient and understanding, who'd listened to her story without judgment, who understood why she needed to check for hidden cameras, why she sometimes had panic attacks over nothing, why trust didn't come easily. "I'm not the person I was before," she wrote. "That version of me died when I saw those files. But I'm building something new, someone who's maybe stronger, definitely warier, but also more sure about what I deserve. No one gets to take that from me again. Not every life-shattering confession involves betrayal or addiction or crime. Sometimes things fall apart simply because we make decisions we can't take back, because we let fear or pride or stubbornness lead us down paths that end in devastation we never intended." This story comes from a father I'll call Marcus. He posted in a relationship advice subreddit, though by the time he was asking for advice, it was far too late for any guidance to matter. Sometimes confession is just documentation, a way of saying, "This happened, I caused it, and I can't undo it." Marcus's daughter was getting married. She was 28, deeply in love with her partner, excited about starting this new chapter. They'd planned the wedding carefully, save up for a meaningful celebration with close friends and family, and Marcus's daughter wanted him to walk her down the aisle. It was important to her, that moment of transition, of being given away by her father to her new life. Marcus said yes. Of course he said yes. But then his other daughter, his younger one, asked if he'd go with her to Hawaii that same weekend. She'd won a trip through work, 2 tickets. All expenses paid, a chance to spend quality time together since they lived in different states now and rarely saw each other. The Hawaii trip conflicted directly with the wedding. Marcus had to choose, and he chose Hawaii. He tried to frame it as reasonable, tried to convince himself it made sense. His younger daughter needed him more. She was going through a rough patch, could use the support. And besides, weddings are just one day. His older daughter would understand. She had her partner now. She didn't need her father the way his younger daughter did. His older daughter didn't understand. She was devastated, asked him to reconsider, explained how much it meant to have him there, how she'd imagined this moment since she was little. Marcus held firm, said she was being dramatic, that it was just one wedding, there would be other family events, that she needed to be more understanding of his relationship with her sister. The wedding happened without him. His daughter called someone else to walk her down the aisle, an uncle who stepped in last minute. Marcus saw the photos later. His daughter looked beautiful and heartbroken. There was a sadness in her eyes that no amount of smile could hide. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her life, and her father had chosen not to be there. Marcus went to Hawaii, spent a week on beautiful beaches with his younger daughter. But the trip was overshadowed by the growing realization of what he'd done. Every day away felt heavier. The paradise around him felt hollow. His younger daughter kept asking if he was okay, if he regretted not going to the wedding. He lied, said everything was fine. When he got back, his older daughter wouldn't speak to him, wouldn't return his calls, sent one text that said simply, "You made your choice, now live with it." Marcus's post was a confession of what he'd destroyed. "I ruined my relationship with my daughter over a vacation," he wrote. "I thought I was making a reasonable choice. I thought she'd forgive me eventually. But it's been 6 months and she won't talk to me. She's blocked my number. My son-in-law told me I'm not welcome in their home. I missed the wedding and I can't ever get that moment back. I can't fix this. I broke something that can't be repaired." The responses were not sympathetic. People were blunt, even harsh. He'd prioritized a free vacation over his daughter's wedding. He'd told her, through his actions, that she didn't matter as much as fun in the sun, that her feelings were less important than his convenience. What did he expect? Some commenters pointed out that this probably wasn't the first time Marcus had chosen his younger daughter over his older one, that this kind of favoritism usually has a history, that his older daughter's reaction suggested accumulated hurt, not just this one incident. Marcus tried to defend himself in the comments, tried to explain his reasoning, but each justification made it worse. He kept centering his own feelings, his own decisions, his own hurt that his daughter wouldn't forgive him. He never seemed to grasp that forgiveness wasn't owed, that his daughter had every right to remove him from her life after he'd shown her where his priorities lay. In a follow-up post months later, Marcus admitted the relationship was still severed. His daughter had a baby, his first grandchild. He found out through social media. Wasn't invited to meet the child. Wasn't informed when they'd been born. He'd become a stranger to his own daughter and the family she was building. "I keep trying to figure out how to fix this," he wrote. "But I think maybe it's not fixable. I think I did something unforgivable, and I'm only now understanding that. I chose wrong. I chose so incredibly wrong. And now I have to live the rest of my life knowing I destroyed my relationship with my daughter over something so stupid." What's striking about Marcus's story is the permanence of it. Some confessions lead to healing, growth, change, but some just document loss. Sometimes we break things that stay broken. We hurt people in ways that can't be mended. And the confession doesn't bring absolution. It's just a record. A way of saying, "I did this. I understand what I did. I'd take it back if I could. But I can't." Marcus missed his daughter's wedding. That moment is gone forever. His grandchild will grow up without knowing him. All because he made a choice that seemed reasonable at the time, but revealed something about his values, his priorities, that his daughter couldn't overlook. The lesson isn't complicated. Some moments matter more than we realize. Some decisions can't be undone. And sometimes confession comes too late to change anything. It's just bearing witness to our own mistakes, hoping someone out there will learn from our failures, will choose differently, will understand what we didn't until it was too late. Let's talk about family secrets, about the confessions that ripple across generations, that change not just one person's understanding of their life, but entire families' sense of who they are. This story comes from a woman who did a DNA test on a whim, one of those ancestry kits that promises to reveal your ethnic background, connect you with distant relatives, maybe solve some family mysteries. She thought it would be fun, a way to confirm the family stories about Irish heritage, maybe find some interesting cousins. What she found instead was that her father wasn't her biological father, and that secret had been carefully guarded for 33 years. The poster, I'll call her Lisa, grew up in what seemed like a stable, loving family. 2 parents who'd been married for over 30 years, 2 siblings, regular family dinners and holiday traditions. Her father was quiet but present, worked hard at a factory job, came home tired, loved his kids in the reserved way some men do. Never effusive, but always there. Lisa never questioned her paternity. Why would she? She looked like her mother, had her mother's eyes, her mother's build. She didn't look much like her father, but plenty of kids don't. Genetics are funny that way. No one thought twice about it. The DNA test results came back with surprising results. Lisa's ethnic breakdown was nothing like what she expected based on family stories. But more significantly, the test had connected her with genetic relatives, people who shared significant amounts of DNA with her, people she'd never heard of. One match was particularly close, a man listed as a half-sibling, a stranger living 3 states away who shared 50% of her DNA, which meant they had one parent in common. Lisa reached out tentatively. They compared notes, realized they had to share a father since their mothers were completely different people. The man, who we'll call David, knew he had half-siblings out there. His father had been something of a womanizer, had fathered children with multiple women over the years. Some he'd acknowledged, some he hadn't. David shared a photo of his father. Lisa stared at it for a long time. This stranger looked more like her than the man she'd called Dad her entire life. Same nose, same smile, same way of tilting his head in photos. The confrontation with her mother was devastating. Lisa showed her the DNA results. Asked directly, "Is Dad not my biological father?" Her mother crumbled. Admitted to an affair 34 years ago, a brief relationship with a co-worker. She'd gotten pregnant, panicked, convinced her husband the baby was his. He'd never questioned it, never asked for a paternity test, just accepted Lisa as his daughter and raised her as such. Lisa's father, the man she'd grown up with, didn't know. He'd spent 33 years believing Lisa was his biological child. Her mother begged Lisa not to tell him, said it would destroy him, that he was old now, that there was no point in upending his whole life over something that happened so long ago. But Lisa couldn't carry that secret. She told him, and watched her family detonate. Her father was shattered, not angry at Lisa, never at Lisa, but devastated by the deception, by the realization that his entire understanding of his family was a lie. He moved out. Started divorce proceedings after over 30 years of marriage, cut off contact with Lisa's mother completely. The worst part was his relationship with Lisa. He insisted he still loved her, that she was still his daughter in every way that mattered. But there was a distance now that hadn't been there before. A grief in how he looked at her. She reminded him of the biggest betrayal of his life. And as much as he tried to push past that, as much as he wanted to maintain their relationship, the foundation had been cracked. Lisa's siblings were caught in the fallout. They were his biological children, the ones who shared his DNA. They felt guilty about that fact, as if their genetics made them more legitimate. Family gatherings became a minefield of unspoken tension and awkward silences. In her Reddit post, Lisa wrote about the impossible position she'd been put in. "I didn't ask for this secret," she wrote. "I didn't choose to be conceived through an affair. I was just a kid trying to learn about my ancestry, and I blew up my entire family. Should I have kept my mouth shut? Let my dad live the rest of his life not knowing? But how could I carry that lie? How could I look him in the eye knowing the truth when he didn't?" The responses were divided. Some people thought she'd done the right thing, that her father deserved to know, that secrets of that magnitude cause harm even when they're kept. Others thought she should have protected the family peace, that some truths do more damage than the lies they replace. Lisa connected with her biological father, the man from the DNA match. They met for coffee. He was kind, interested in knowing her, but he'd lived a completely separate life. Had other children he'd raised. She was just a surprise addition, a consequence of a brief affair he'd barely remembered until he got the notification about the DNA match. In follow-up posts, Lisa described trying to navigate her new reality. Her relationship with her dad, the man who'd raised her, remained strained. He tried, but she could see the effort it took, could feel the space where easy affection used to be. Her mother blamed Lisa for the divorce, said if she'd just kept quiet, everything would have been fine. But would it have been fine? Lisa asked. Or would it have been a lie? And is a comfortable lie better than a painful truth? 2 years later, Lisa's conclusion was nuanced. She didn't regret finding out, didn't regret telling her father, but she also understood that truth comes with a price, that her curiosity had cost her the family structure she'd always known, that knowing hadn't made anything better, it had just changed everything. "I think about that DNA test kit sitting in my drawer," she wrote. "How innocent it seemed, how simple, just spit in a tube and learn something fun about yourself. I never imagined it would be the grenade that destroyed my family. But maybe that was always there, waiting. Maybe I just pulled the pin. Sometimes the hardest confessions aren't about things we've done or secrets we've kept. They're about who we are, about confronting parts of ourselves we've spent years trying to deny or hide or change, about finally admitting that we can't be the person everyone expects us to be." This story comes from someone who spent their entire life trying to meet everyone else's expectations, trying to be normal, trying to fit in, until one day they couldn't anymore. The poster used a throwaway account, called themselves Lost and Confused. They were 24 years old, raised in a conservative religious family, expected to follow a certain path, graduate college, get married, have children, build a life that looked like everyone else's in their community. They'd tried. They really had. They dated people they weren't attracted to, forced themselves into a mold that didn't fit, smiled through family dinners where relatives asked about marriage prospects, went to church and prayed to be different, to want what they were supposed to want, to be attracted to who they were supposed to be attracted to. It hadn't worked. At 24, sitting in yet another awkward date with yet another nice person they felt nothing for, the reality became unavoidable. They were gay, had known, on some level, since they were a teenager, but had buried it so deep, covered it with so many layers of denial and performance, that they'd almost convinced themselves it wasn't true. Almost. The post was titled, "I can't keep pretending anymore. But telling the truth will destroy everything." They described the impossible choice they faced. Come out and lose their family, lose their community, lose the support structure they'd known their entire life. Their parents had made their views clear many times, had talked about gay people as sinners, as broken, as people to be pitied and prayed for but never accepted, or stay closeted, keep pretending, find someone they could tolerate enough to marry, build a life based on a fundamental lie, make themselves and probably their future spouse miserable in service of maintaining appearances. "I don't want to be brave," they wrote. "I just want to exist. I want to love who I love without it being a political statement or a family crisis. I want to walk down the street holding someone's hand without calculating whether it's safe. I want to go home for Christmas and be myself. But I can't have those things. Not where I am. Not with who my family is." The responses were overwhelming. Thousands of people sharing their own coming out stories. Some whose families surprised them with acceptance. Many whose families rejected them completely. Some who'd been estranged for years. Others who'd found chosen families that loved them unconditionally in ways their biological families never had. One comment stuck out. "The confession you're afraid to make isn't going to destroy everything. The truth was always there. You're just finally admitting it. Your family's reaction might destroy your relationship with them, but that's their choice, not your confession. You can't control how they respond to who you are. You can only control whether you keep lying to yourself." The poster responded, "But what if I can't survive losing them? What if coming out costs me everything and I end up alone and broken and regretting it? What if being true to myself isn't worth the price?" Another commenter wrote back, "You're already alone. You're already pretending to be someone you're not every single day. You already don't have your family's love because they don't actually know you. They love a fictional version of you that you've created to make them comfortable. Is that really better than the risk of rejection?" That perspective seemed to shift something. In a follow-up post weeks later, the original poster shared that they'd come out, first to friends, then to siblings, finally to parents. The reaction was exactly as bad as they'd feared. Their parents cried, called it a phase, suggested conversion therapy, made it clear that this wasn't acceptable, that they needed to choose between their lifestyle and their family. "So I chose me," they wrote. "I chose being authentic over being accepted, and it hurts worse than I imagined, but it also feels like breathing for the first time, like I've been underwater my whole life, and finally surfaced." They'd moved to a new city, started building a life that felt genuine, found a queer community that welcomed them, started dating people they were actually attracted to, began therapy to work through the religious trauma and internalized homophobia. The grief of losing their family was immense. Some days it felt unbearable, but it was also freeing, knowing they didn't have to pretend anymore, didn't have to calculate every word and gesture to maintain a fiction. A year later, they posted an update. They were doing okay. Not great every day, but okay. They'd fallen in love, were in a relationship that felt healthy and real in ways they'd never experienced before. Their younger sibling had reached out, said they didn't care about the parents' rules. They wanted to stay in touch. It was something, a thread of family connection that hadn't been completely severed. "I don't regret coming out," they wrote, "but I won't pretend it hasn't been hard. I won't pretend there aren't days I miss having a family who knows me, who I can call when things are difficult. But I also can't pretend anymore, period. I spent 24 years being who everyone else needed me to be. Now I'm figuring out who I actually am, and that's worth the cost, even on days when the cost feels too high." Their story represents a particular kind of confession, not admitting to harm or mistakes, but acknowledging truth, claiming space to exist authentically, even when that existence makes other people uncomfortable. It's a confession that shouldn't need to be one, that in a better world would just be information. But in this world, in their community, it was revolutionary, dangerous, brave in ways they never wanted to have to be. Let's talk about one more confession, one more moment when life falls apart and someone has to decide what to do with the pieces. This final story is about a man I'll call Thomas. He posted in a grief support subreddit in the middle of the night, the kind of post written when sleep won't come and the weight of everything feels crushing. Thomas's wife had died 6 months earlier. Brain aneurysm, sudden and devastating. One moment she was fine, complaining about a headache, the next she'd collapsed. By the time paramedics arrived, she was gone. No warning, no goodbye, just instant, permanent absence. They'd been married for 12 years, had 2 kids, ages 8 and 10. Thomas had thought they had decades left. They were supposed to grow old together, watch their kids graduate, become grandparents. All the normal milestones of a life built together, and then she was just gone. And Thomas was left trying to hold everything together while falling apart internally. The post wasn't about grief itself. It was about what Thomas had found after his wife died, while going through her things, sorting through paperwork and personal effects, making sense of a life that had ended abruptly. He'd found evidence of an affair, not recent, from about 5 years ago, text messages she'd saved but thought she'd deleted, email correspondence with someone from her office, plans to meet when Thomas thought she was working late. The affair had lasted about 8 months before apparently ending. Thomas sat with this information, paralyzed by it. His wife had cheated years ago. She'd kept it secret, and now she was gone, and he couldn't ask why. He couldn't confront her, couldn't fight, or forgive, or understand. He was just left holding this knowledge that changed everything he thought he knew about their marriage. "Do I tell anyone?" he wrote. "Do I let everyone keep believing we had this perfect relationship? Or do I admit that she betrayed me? But who does that help? She's dead. My kids don't need to know their mother cheated on their father. My in-laws don't need their image of their daughter tarnished. Maybe some secrets should stay buried." But he couldn't carry it alone. The weight of knowing was crushing him. Every time someone talked about his wife, called her an angel, talked about their beautiful marriage, Thomas felt like a fraud. Like he was participating in a lie, maintaining an illusion that his wife had carefully constructed and then left him to maintain after her death. The responses were incredibly divided. Some people thought he should keep it private, that his wife's mistakes weren't relevant now that she was gone. That telling people wouldn't change anything except damage her memory and hurt people who were already grieving. Others felt he deserved to be honest about what he was feeling. That grief is complicated enough without pretending, that he shouldn't have to protect her reputation at the expense of his own emotional honesty. One person wrote, "Grief isn't just sadness. It's every emotion you ever felt about someone, all hitting you at once. You're allowed to be angry at her. You're allowed to be hurt by her betrayal even though she's gone. You don't have to canonize her just because she died." Thomas responded that he didn't want to be angry, didn't want his last memories of his wife to be poisoned by this discovery, but he couldn't pretend it away either. Couldn't just ignore what he knew. The affair had happened. She'd made choices that hurt him, that she'd never confessed, never asked forgiveness for, and now he was left carrying that pain with no outlet for it. He decided to tell his therapist, but no one else, to work through the complicated grief privately, to let his kids and his wife's family maintain their memories of her untainted by knowledge of her mistakes. Not because she deserved protection, but because they did, because his anger at her shouldn't become their burden. In follow-up posts, Thomas described the strange experience of grieving someone he'd realized he didn't fully know, of loving someone who'd betrayed him, of missing someone while also being furious at them, of wanting them back desperately while knowing that if she'd lived, they would have had to confront this eventually, deal with the breach of trust, maybe not survived it. "I think I'm grieving 2 things, he wrote 6 months later. "I'm grieving my wife, the actual person who I loved despite her flaws and mistakes. But I'm also grieving the marriage I thought we had, the perfect partnership I believed in. That's the harder loss somehow, the realization that my reality wasn't real, that even when she was alive, I was living in a partially constructed illusion." A year out from her death, Thomas was doing better. He'd started dating again. Not seriously, just testing the waters of connection after so much loss. His kids were coping, going to counselling, building their own relationships with their grief. But Thomas carried the secret still, the knowledge of his wife's affair that he'd never shared with anyone outside therapy, and he wasn't sure if that was the right choice, if protecting her memory was worth the continued deception, if maintaining the illusion served anyone. "I think about confession a lot now," he wrote in what would be his final post in that subreddit, "about what we owe each other in terms of truth. My wife never confessed, took her secrets to the grave, and I found them anyway. So what do I owe her now? What do I owe her memory? What do I owe myself and my kids and our future? I don't have answers, but I'm learning to sit with not knowing, to accept that some things stay complicated, that love and hurt can coexist, that someone can be gone and still breaking your heart in new ways, and that sometimes the hardest confession is admitting you don't know how to feel. That grief doesn't follow a script. That moving forward doesn't mean forgetting or forgiving. It just means taking the next step, and the next, and the next, until one day you realize you're living again. Not the life you planned, not the life you wanted, but a life nonetheless. These stories we've shared tonight, they're not easy. They're not the kind of thing you hear and feel instantly better. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is knowing you're not alone in the falling apart, in the moments when life doesn't make sense, when the people you trusted betray you, when the future you planned crumbles, when secrets come out or stay buried or poison everything they touch. Life falls apart sometimes. That's just what happens when you're human, when you're fragile and flawed and trying your best in a world that doesn't come with instructions. The confessions we've shared tonight are proof of that. Proof that behind every stable-looking life is complexity and struggle and moments of absolute devastation. But here's what else they prove. People survive. Not always intact, not always unchanged, but they survive. They keep going even when everything is broken, even when the confession is too big, the betrayal too deep, the loss too heavy. They find ways to keep breathing, to take the next step, to build something new from the rubble of what was destroyed. If your life is falling apart right now, if you're lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering how you'll get through tomorrow, I want you to know something. This isn't the end. It feels like it. God, it probably feels like nothing will ever be okay again. But that feeling is lying to you. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it does change them, transforms them from acute pain into something you can learn to carry. The confession you're afraid to make, the truth you're hiding, the weight you're carrying alone, it won't crush you forever. It might crush you today, maybe tomorrow too. But eventually, whether through sharing it or working through it or just surviving despite it, that weight will shift, will become something you can manage, something that doesn't define every moment of your existence. You are not your worst moment. You are not your biggest mistake. You are not the thing that happened to you. You're the person who keeps going anyway. Who watches Minecraft videos at 2 a.m. because it's soothing? Who reaches out to strangers on the internet because maybe their stories will help make sense of your own chaos? Who hasn't given up, even though giving up would be so much easier? Whatever you're going through, whatever confession is echoing in your head, whatever truth is too heavy to keep carrying alone, you don't have to figure it all out tonight. You just have to make it to tomorrow, and then the next day, and the next. One breath at a time, one moment at a time, until suddenly weeks have passed and you realize you're still here, still standing, maybe not okay, but alive. And that's enough. For now, that's enough. The people in these stories, they're all still figuring it out too, still learning how to live with what they've done or what was done to them, still trying to make sense of lives that stopped making sense a long time ago. You're in good company. All of us here, watching the sun set in Minecraft worlds, listening to stories about other people's pain. We're all just trying to make it through, together but separate, connected through shared struggle, even if we're struggling alone. So rest if you can. Let the gentle sounds of the game wash over you. Know that tomorrow will come, whether you're ready or not. And maybe that's okay. Maybe ready is overrated. Maybe we just do the next thing and hope it leads somewhere better than where we are now. Your life might be falling apart, but you're still here, still reading, still existing in this moment. And that matters, more than you probably realize, more than I can properly explain. You matter. Your survival matters. The fact that you made it this far, through everything you've been through, you're tougher than you think. The confessions we shared tonight, they're heavy. They're proof that life can be brutal and unfair and devastating. But they're also proof that people endure. That humans are remarkably resilient even when we feel irreparably broken. That the worst moments of our lives don't have to define the totality of our existence. Whatever you're carrying tonight, you don't have to carry it alone. There are people who understand, support groups and therapists, and random internet strangers who've been where you are, who know what it's like when life falls apart, Who can sit with you in the rubble and help you figure out what to do with the pieces? You're going to be okay. Maybe not today. Maybe not for a while. But eventually, probably, hopefully. And until then, we'll be here, sharing stories, building pixelated worlds, existing in these small, gentle spaces we carve out when the real world becomes too much. Take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Forgive yourself for not having it all figured out. None of us do. We're all just stumbling through, trying our best, hoping tomorrow is a little easier than today was. And if you need to confess something, if you need to finally say the truth that's been eating at you, tell someone safe, write it down, scream it into the void. Whatever you need to do to get it out of your head and into the world where it can stop poisoning you from the inside. Secrets lose their power when we stop keeping them. Confessions hurt, but silence hurts worse. You're not alone in this. You never were. You're just one more person trying to make it through. Just like everyone in the stories we shared. Just like everyone watching this video. Just like me. Sitting here in the dark, typing words into the void, hoping they reach someone who needs to hear them. Life falls apart. But it also keeps going. And so do you. One day at a time. One moment at a time. Until eventually the falling apart becomes something else. Becomes growth or wisdom. Or just survival. Becomes part of your story instead of the entirety of it. You're doing better than you think you are. You're stronger than you feel. And you're going to make it through this. Maybe not unchanged. Maybe not unscathed. But you'll make it. Because that's what people do. We survive. We endure. We keep going, even when we don't know how. So rest now. Let the gentle rhythms of the Minecraft world soothe you. Let these stories remind you that everyone's life falls apart sometimes, and that falling apart isn't the end. It's just a chapter, a hard one, a devastating one, but just a chapter. Tomorrow is coming, and you'll face it, because that's what you do. You keep going, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. You keep going, and that's enough. For tonight, that's more than enough. You're enough. Rest well. Tomorrow can wait.